also wanted to bring this as an opportunity for people to learn from you as I've gotten to learn from you.
I mean, that whole journey of understanding what really matters in life was good that I went through it at 29, so that, at 44, I can tell you a lot of things that I thought mattered at 28 don't matter today. One of the things that throughout my journey was constant was training and development.
You're listening to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, a podcast that delivers value and offers up insight that'll help your credit union grow. ServiceStar has been consulting with credit unions for over 20 years, growing them in the areas of cultural development, leadership development, and management training. To learn more about what ServiceStar can do for you or your credit union, check them out at servicestarconsulting.com.
All right. Welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast.
Hey.
Scott Albrecht.
Hey, welcome to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. Scott Anderle.
How does this feel? I'm interviewing you.
It feels like a walk down memory lane. 5 years, man. 5 years we've been rocking this podcast. And yeah, it's great. It's a blessing. It is something that I'm grateful to be able to have done in my career.
Yeah. And I totally get that walk down memory lane. And today I want to be different. I want us to, essentially, we're kind of slowing down. Before we even recorded, Albrecht, you, me, and our producer, Ryan, we talked about what we've done, looking back at our mission and where we want to go. So today is more about slowing down and looking back. And from looking back, I want to talk about your journey in your career in general, but also the journey of the podcast and all these leaders that we've interviewed. And I want to hear, all right, what has Albrecht learned from your own story? What are the principles you've developed? How have you put them into action? And so people get to understand the voices behind the show. Just a, brag moment. Yeah. I tell everyone, you are the reason I'm as good, if I'm good at all, at what I do. So for listeners, Albrecht really took me under his wing, acted as a mentor, and has developed me to understand the material, but not only understand the material, really understand presenting it as a trainer, having discussions, and also with the podcast. One thing I'll say is you've done a really good job, not only delegating, but helping me be better, where you've watched my videos and you've said, hey, this is what you're doing really well. And then you're like, hey, work on this. Stop saying these uhs, or hey, more dramatic pause here, or hey, ask this question, get the listeners thinking. You've made me a lot better. And I wanted to say thank you publicly.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm super excited. Actually, after this podcast, I get to meet with a trainer over on the East Coast who's doing just that, putting time on my calendar to learn from me, which, I mean, who am I, right? I would say the same thing about you. This podcast is what it is because you challenged me to be better. And I would say much of what I've learned over the last 3 or 4 years, I don't know how long you've been with ServiceStar, but I'd attribute that to you, not necessarily the guest that we had on. So good job leveling me up.
Cool. Well, let's transition to where I'm going to start asking you some questions, but I want to set the angle for our listeners. This won't be as much of a formal interview. Heck, we've worked together for three or 4 years. I want this to be more like a campfire conversation. We're sitting down, eating s'mores, having a good drink, and we're learning, and we're talking to you as a teacher, as a learner, as someone who's led, as someone who's coached individuals to reach their maximum potential, like me, someone that's interviewed a lot of guests and gained a lot of insight and kept refining yourself, as you say, 1% better every day. And I want to hear specifics of what were those 1% better every day moments for you that would translate to some of our leaders that are either current leaders, middle managers, executive leaders, or people that love the credit union industry and they want to get better. I was talking to someone this morning and they said, hey, I've got an MA who's applying to be an ABM, and they're really good at the skills, but they're a little rough when it comes to self-awareness, some of this emotional, intelligent aspect. And the conversation was, how do we get them better? And I'm hoping that some of these people are listening right now and that they're going to learn some of these lessons from you. So Albrecht, you ready for some questions?
I can't wait, man. Let's go.
All right. Well, hey, the first question I want to ask for our listeners is, who was Scott Albrecht and who is Scott Albrecht becoming?
So Scott Albrecht before walking with a limp. So a good friend of mine said their father used to say, "Don't trust a man without a limp." I don't know if you ever heard that saying before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have a limp when I was like 28, and I was working for a Fortune 15 company, And yeah, dude, life was stressful, but I had the career resume job. Fortune 15, there's only 14 companies better than that in the world. And that was the ticket in town to get a job there. So I felt like I was doing a good job. I was volunteering like crazy, getting involved everywhere. And that caused a lot of stress and health issues, and eventually I almost lost my life. And so post surgery, post going under the knife, perspective changed. The fact that I worked at a Fortune 15 company didn't really matter that much to me anymore. And I saw an opening for a credit union manager job and thought, you know what? I think I'd have a lot of fun doing that. And did something on paper that seemed silly, take a branch manager job at a credit union versus, staying where I was at. But man, oh man, if it wasn't for God humbling me, there's
Mhm.
no way I'd be standing right here today. I mean, that whole journey of understanding what really matters in life was good that I went through it at 29, so that, at 44, I can tell you a lot of things that I thought mattered at 28 don't matter today. Yeah. Family matters, friends matter, how you treat people matters. Your resume, not so much.
And I think we're going to get to some more details with that. So I want you to paint the scene a little bit for me. So there's only 14 companies better than where you were originally working. And what I'm also hearing you say is where you originally working had nothing to do with the credit union movement at all. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So
So
it was just the big game in town. So we worked I worked for a staffing company who helped this company hire people. And a good
okay.
friend of mine who worked with me at the staffing company got a job at Cardinal Health. And they were looking for someone who could make a bunch of phone calls in a day. And she had seen me do that at Robert Half.
Yeah, you yeah.
so so I'm the guy, right? So they're like, you
Mhm.
got to hire that guy. And so I came in not really aware of the size of the role that I was
Mhm.
taking, not really aware of the scope of the role. I ended up working for one of the most profitable divisions of that company in one of the most profitable positions, whereas the CEO was like looking at how many vendors I was signing up through the OptiFreight program. And so, well, yeah, what ended up being, hey, make 100 calls a day turned into, me being so stressed out, so, worried about, results that it, yeah, negatively impacted my health.
Yeah. So before we get into that impact, what I want something I'm hearing from you, which is really interesting. It's the first time I'm hearing this, is how you got into this Fortune 15 company. And one thing you had said was I wasn't really aware that I was in one of the most profitable teams doing some of the most significant work. And we have, I would say that there's more than two types, but I would say there's two main buckets of people that may be listening. There may be people that, hey, I just fell in love with this movement and I'm just saying yes and volunteering. It sounds similar to kind of what you started doing, and they find themselves maybe in a very impactful position or a position that they believe has a lot of meaning. But also there are people that are listening saying, how do I get there? I know exactly where I want to be. I know exactly what I want to do. And this position, this title is really, really important to me. Now, what I want people, listeners, to hear from you is, all right, what have you learned? Take me to younger Albrecht. Younger Albrecht, out of those two buckets, which one would you say younger Albrecht was when he took this job with the health company?
Yeah, well, ever since I graduated from college, I always felt like I was missing out. I was a fifth year senior, super senior, and so many times, I'd see my people who actually went to college and went to school and didn't have that fifth year go on to work in pharmaceuticals, go play golf in California.
Yeah.
Roommates of mine working for big banks in New York, and just all my friends get these really kind of nice jobs, and here I am still slumming it at college because I was goofing off too much. And so I
Mhm.
finally get a job at Wells Fargo Financial, right? Accidentally created the subprime mortgage crisis.
Oh, this was before the healthcare and credit union.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Okay.
so my first job out of college is, a sales job. Who wants to make 100 sales calls a day? Most people coming out of college say no. That's why I went to college, so I didn't have to make 100 sales calls a day. But when your GPA is barely graduated, you don't get your pick of the job market. So 2004, I got a sales job at Wells Fargo Financial. Ended up working my way up the ranks to the point where I got a chance to move to a different location, met my wife. And so
Mhm.
Wells Fargo, although it wasn't probably the best moment creating accidentally creating the subprime mortgage crisis, it did allow me to meet my bride of 18 years,
Yeah.
Allison, which is nice. But she moved to Ohio, got a different job in Ohio. Wells Fargo Financial was not in Ohio, and so I chose to move from Michigan to Ohio to follow the girl. And so she got a banking job. I
Wow.
got a banking job. I ended up being an assistant branch manager for Woodforest National Bank inside of Walmart. And so talk about, uh, Fortune 15 company or showing up to Walmart at 4 a.m. on Black Friday to open up the branch. And so, I'm going through this like trajectory of all my friends got these really cushy jobs. Here I am at Walmart, right? Then I'm in a
Mhm.
staffing agency making 100 calls a day during the Great Recession. What gives, right? Why can't I have this, this really nice resume job? And so when I finally got the Fortune 15 gig, I felt like I had made it. But honestly, I wasn't as happy as I was when I was working at Walmart, dressing up like a leprechaun, going around with a shopping cart with balloons, giving balloons to kids to pop and see if there's $5 in it. And so when that credit union manager at that corporate headquarters job came open, I realized happiness doesn't come from a job title. Happiness comes from something more authentic to your personality. And for me, it's dressing like a leprechaun on St. Patrick's Day and handing out green balloons and seeing if there's a $5 bill in one of them to deposit in your new membership. That's really where I cut my teeth. And even on my calls on Wells Fargo, I was the quirky guy. I would use my quirkiness to kind of get in on a conversation when someone's trying to watch Jeopardy. I'm calling them at 6 p.m. at night in their jams and talking about mortgages. But even today, as a trainer, that part of my personality has not changed. That is my authentic self. I'm a little bit weird, and I've gotten to the point now where I can make
Man.
that professional still, but it is part of my brand and my DNA.
Something I want listeners to hear right now. You had said happiness was not found in the title. Happiness was found in living my personality. Not in the title, but living my personality. And it reminds me, I'm thinking of like storytelling movies. You also see it in music, but there's this storytelling arc where it is the hero starts at home. And it's this idea of, oh, man, I really want to go do this. And then they go on this journey. And then what happens is they end up wanting to go back home. They find home again, but they've changed. They've gathered more insight, or as you might say, they got that limp. And you see it with movies all the time where it's like, man, this kid really wants to go do this, but his parent doesn't want him to do it. They go on this adventure. Now the kid understands what the parent's going through more than the parent understands what the kid. And they come back home, but it looks different. And what I'm hearing you say is you're in college. This is your home, and you hear people getting these big fancy jobs, and you're thinking, man, that's what I want. And through your journey, you find that you get to work with one of the top performing companies. But what I'm also hearing you allude to is that there was a return journey where you came back, and through this return journey, you learned that happiness is not in the title. It's in living my personality.
Yep. And
You know, I know you've shared with listeners a bit, but let's dive deeper into that. Tell me, all right, when you got this, did you find a sense of purpose, pride, happiness in it? Did it last for a long time? Was it short? What happened? And then where was that the switch where you're like, I need to live out my personality more than seeking this title?
well, one of the things that throughout my journey was constant was training and development. So when I was in college, I got an HR degree, not because I loved HR. I don't love HR. I actually kind of hate HR. So maybe that explains the fifth year. But what I really wanted to do is train and develop people. And then when I
Yeah.
graduated and I applied for training and development jobs, they're like, well, you need to have a management background.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. So I applied to be a manager, and they're like, well, you can't just apply to be a manager. You have to like start off entry level. And so that's kind of like, okay, so I got a lot of friction coming out of college. So when I got to Wells Fargo Financial, I was like, I want to train. And they're like, well, you got to sell. And I was like, well, can I do your sales training? And they're like, sure. So I actually started selling and training on selling for Wells Fargo Financial in 2004. When I got to Robert Half, And Wood Forest, same thing. I'd say, hey, I want to train. They're like, yeah, but we hired you to be a branch manager. We hired you to make 100 calls a day during the Great Recession. I'd be like, I know, but I want to train. And so every job I'd find like these little windows, these opportunities to train, because that's just kind of what I've always wanted to do. Even when I got to Cardinal Health, I wasn't a trainer. I was someone who made calls, 100 calls a day. That was kind of my ticket into Cardinal Health, right? But they had this something called a new hire orientation. Some of you guys might have heard that before, where, everybody that starts goes to new hire orientation, and they're doing open roll call auditions, kind of like American Idol style, for someone to run the new hire orientation for Cardinal Health. And that was kind of my big break. That was where I got to do for, like 10 years. I ran new hire orientation for Cardinal Health for 10 years, 3 of which I was an employee of Cardinal Health, and 7 of which I was actually an employee of Baxter Credit Union inside of Cardinal Health. When I flipped over to being a branch manager, they kept me on because I was one of their best new hire orientation managers. And so that's really where I cut my teeth in, having a every other Monday flow of doing a 4-hour, presentation on a PowerPoint that's, been well produced and well kind of, there was a standard for training. It wasn't just something I was doing on the side for Wells Fargo. It was like, no, if you're coming to this training, you better be prepared. You better have it memorized. You better have a script.
Yeah.
And every year I had to re-audition. Every year I had to retry out. Every year I had to have them look at my, so a lot of the things that you just kind of share with the audience that I helped you with was through years of me working on my own craft and going to Toastmasters and working on it there. So if it wasn't for that Cardinal Health experience, I would not have had the same level of train the trainer, getting rid of the ums, the ahs, 10 years of working through Toastmasters and getting my, it's a competent communicator. Yeah. Competent communicator and whatever the thing is. And so I never really had a job in training. For 20 years, I tried to get a job in training and I never got one until they called me during COVID. And 3 branches, I was over 4 branches at the time. They were all closed. I was doing mortgages in my basement, and Taylor Murray called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to train for a living?"
Yeah.
And I was like,
yeah,
just for like the last 20 years, I've been trying to get a job in training. So, yes, I'd like to do that. And so here we are.
Something I want listeners to hear that you've said a few times different ways. One is, all right, it's not about the title of being a trainer, but even that, you're saying, how can I still live out training and developing people? Which brings me back to our course in emerging leaders called Work-Life Integration, where we work with aspiring leaders to create a personal purpose statement that says, what's the action that you're going to bring? How are you going to help those around you? And then what are the values? What's that personality? What makes you uniquely you? And what I heard you say, Albrecht, was, hey, I got to get my foot in the door. What can I do? You know what? I can make 100 calls. That's something that is easy for me, or is something that comes naturally that I think, why can't everyone else do it? Well, that's because that's one of your superpowers. I can do that. And then not just because you got your foot in the door, now you are saying, where are opportunities for me to live out my purpose of instructing and training others? And then from that, you said you've learned it's not just about the title, it's about your personality. So you're finding those values. And one value I'm hearing is quirky, keeping it weird, that you're doing. And you're like, all right, how can I make it weird but fun, memorable time as I'm developing people? And then the evolution of that is, all right, you're training and you're developing skills to even be a better trainer. So now you're able to develop trainers while training material on sales, service, and leadership as well. So I want listeners to hear, hey, you may not get the title of the job you're looking for, but maybe that that job is what's going to get you in the door so you can find out how to best live your purpose, doing things outside. I'm thinking about that with me right now. Like, I was a rock star. I was in a band doing that stuff. And one of the things I love is creating connection, creating purpose, and creating really cool like materials, like content. And you've given me the opportunity to do this podcast with you and to really focus on more of the creative content side, which is not part of my job, but I'm finding opportunities to live that out outside of training as well, which is really, really cool.
You are a modern day podcast rock star.
Yeah, modern day podcast rock star. So I want to ask one more question regarding your journey and Service Star, where you are now, though I think listeners probably got a lot just from that. And then I want to transition to the podcast. So
Yep.
right here is leadership. We talk about a bunch of principles. And some people, they're able to understand the abstract principles and formulas and be like, I totally get it. I know how to apply it. For some people, it just feels a little too heady and they don't like, how does this change my Tuesday? You know? So the question I have for you is throughout your journey, it could be at any of those points. It could be at Service Star. It could be recently. But what's a moment where leadership stopped being just theory, but became personal? It became actionable. Where was something you're like, oh, this is actually what it looks like in action, not just talking about it?
Yeah. So the companies that I've worked for almost have always partnered with Gallup in some way, shape, or form. And so Cardinal Health, I got certified as a Gallup strengths coach at Baxter Credit Union. I got to use that certification to help multiple teams do their strengths. And here at Service Star, we kind of took that certification and we used that to kind of help other credit unions grow in their strengths. But one of the things that was interesting about Gallup when they came and presented at Baxter Credit Union's annual all-employee meeting was that they started every speech out, every talk out with their mission. I can't repeat it to you, but they would always say, at Gallup, our mission is to blah, 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 blah. And so today's talk is on blah. And I really I enjoyed that. And I've wanted to kind of steal that, but I didn't have my own personal mission statement. And so I think crafting my own personal mission statement has been a part of the journey that I think is the most rewarding, because if we're going to tell people start with why, if we're telling people, hey, mission matters, talk about mission 10% more, you're going to increase productivity by 4.1% and decrease turnover by 8.2%. You know, these are the things that we tell people, then we probably need to talk about mission more ourselves. And so my mission, I don't know if I've actually shared it with the podcast listeners, is to replace ineffective behaviors with effective ones as they relate to your mission. So most credit unions have a mission of improving the financial well-being of their membership. And so what can I do? What kind of habits can I change inside of the organization that are getting in the way of fastly achieving your mission? And so Anderle and I just finished the book Atomic Habits by James.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
You know, it's not just adding a new habit. Usually it's a replacement of one that's not as effective. And so we try our best here at Service Star not to use the word bad, like a bad behavior. We just like to say there's probably a more effective way to do something. And so replacing the ineffective with the effective, that's my mission in life. You know, my vision, which is different than my mission, which is, you know, a vision's a future cache. It's a kind of, what do I want the future to be? I want managers to have confidence, competence, and collaboration. So my vision is the 3 C's. They walk away from my training with more confidence. They walk away with my training with more knowledge, competence, and they also walk away from my trainings with a lot more collaboration, either with their own credit union or with other credit unions if it was more of a nationwide call. But that's kind of my vision, is that there's less friction in managing people because of those 3 C's: competence, confidence, and collaboration.
Yeah. And even with that, it's like, question I would tell listeners is, how can you live that out in your job now instead of at another title? Man, really, really good stuff. And I love what you said, replacing ineffective with effective behaviors. And you hit it right on the nail on the head with, hey, it's not that there's bad behaviors, but this goes right back to the Albrechtism. But what can we do that's 1% better every day? And in that book, Atomic Habits, they talk about the example of, I think it's like the cycling team for France, or the ones that won Tour de France. It's not that they said what you're doing is bad. They said, what can we do to even be better? And they talked about wearing the right clothes, having the right diet, making sure like the bike seat felt just right. These are little things that are not bad originally. They just said, how can we get better at it? But Albrecht, I'm about to pivot hard. It's almost time for us to finish.
Podcast pivot. It's the podcast pivot.
Let's pivot. So we're ending off, and I'm just going to ask you some rapid fire questions. All right. So you only got a minute, and I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
All right.
3 questions relating to podcast and guests we've interviewed,
Let's
how
go.
it's changed your life.
Yep.
So here we go. So first lightning question. Who are 2 guests that have left a fingerprint on the way you lead today? 2 guests that have changed how you do your work.
Me and Brett King. I'm joking about the me part. Brett King is the futurist that we had on. He really kind of opened my eyes to the future of credit unions, or maybe not credit unions, and how there has to be a differentiator in how we serve people. Otherwise, we are a commodity, and there really is no reason for us to be anything but the online banks that are taking over the space. He also opened my eyes to Bitcoin. It was scary.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed, who was the magic trick guy? The guy with the fire?
Yeah, Joel Hilchey. Yeah.
Yeah. His charisma, his character. Yeah, I just wanted to work with that guy. I just wanted to kind of be friends with that guy. And so I wanted to emulate that more in the podcast, in how I deal with other people. If I'm on somebody else's podcast, he's like one of those guys. He's a guy's guy. You just want to be like, you want to be friends with that guy, you know?
An artist.
Yeah.
Man, those are great references. Brett King with knowledge and really encouraging us to transform how we do work. Joel Hilchey with presentation and really connecting with people. All right, ready for the next one?
Yeah.
Next, that was really fast. Great job, Albrecht. All right, here we go. Across every guest that you've interviewed, even before BS, before Scott Anderle, what one single idea hit you the hardest that still stays with you today? Out of all the guests we've interviewed, what's the one thing that's hit you the hardest?
The one thing that's hit me the hardest is usually what I bring them on for is not what we end up liking the most. It's usually hearing their story that really connects for me as someone who's doing the interviewing. And so, like, I remember Taylor Murray and I interviewed Mike, who does the interviews of people at the conferences, and
Mike Lawson, right?
just hearing his story about like where he got the name from his business, which we didn't even plan on asking him. It was just like, how did you get that name for your business? Going into those stories is really the fun of this job of working in the podcast. I'll tell the listeners this: of all the things that we do at Service Star, podcast is probably the first to go when it comes to like, hey, what can we scrap? What can we Apollo 13? And we fought hard for years to keep it because I love the story. I love hearing people's story.
Yeah, man. All right. That's really cool. What I'm hearing from there is this idea of, and I think it's very applicable to credit union leaders. So we've got a plan. If A happens, then B. If one happens, then two. But what I'm hearing is there's a part of an art of being flexible. Or really what I encourage people is, if we're in the transformation business, we're the guide in people's lives, which means it's not always having a roadmap, but being okay with taking some detours. And it sounds like those detours may be the highlights.
It's like when you're in Bible study, you hope the pastor has thought about where he's going to go with the material. But sometimes the best conversations is when somebody asks a question that's not even a part of the study. And now it's like, oh yeah, we didn't even think about that when we looked at that verse. So yeah.
And embrace it. Yeah. Last question, podcast related. All right. All episodes we've done without guests, when we've talked about guests that stood out to you, we talked about what's the one thing that you've learned personally. Now, as we've talked to a lot of guests, when you think about, all right, what is a common theme that shows up over and over again with Brett King, with Mike Lawson, with Joe Hilchey, with everyone else? What's a common theme? What's a common thing we are talking about with every leader that you're like, hey, this is what I've learned is maybe a secret or a formula to success as a leader? What's something that has shown up to you that's made itself, is the word prevalent, made itself very like, hey, this is the thing?
Yeah. Well, when you do this podcast as often as we do, it's easy for us to show up and this is just like another day, just like another part of the day. You know, it's like, all right, we're doing a podcast. But like, what is the common theme about every guest that we've ever had on is that they're super excited to be on. They're super jacked to be, like, I had Mike Valentine on, my old boss at Baxter Credit Union, and he was tickled that we invited him to come onto the podcast. And I was tickled that he accepted the invite. And so as much as this can feel like a grind 5 years into it, and it's fun to see that this is something that people look forward to. The listeners look forward to. Our guests look forward to. Our guests are nervous before they come onto the podcast. And so the overwhelming theme that I see in our podcast guests is that this matters. There is a place for this in the industry, and they're jacked to be on, and we're excited to have them.
Man, that's really cool. And it reminds me of one of our values: no progress without passion, that we need to have that zeal. And what I'm hearing you say is the guest we've brought on is living out that value of zeal.
Oh yeah.
Well, Albrecht, thank you for switching the seats, being a guest. Before we end it, what's the final word you have for our guests?
Well, keep on listening to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast. We'll catch you in the next episode.
That's it. If you're interested in submitting a question to the Credit Union Leadership Podcast, we want to hear from you. Go in our show notes. We have a link over there, and it's going to take you to two options. You can submit a question through email, or you can submit an audio recording through SpeakPipe. We make it super easy. Go to the link in the show notes, click audio recording. It's going to take you straight to a website where you just press the record button. You've got 90 seconds to submit a question, and then you just type in your name and email address, and that's it. It comes straight to us, so you don't need to download anything. You don't need to get any new software. You just go to this website, press record, and click submit, and we're good to go. So go to the link in the show notes, click if you want to submit a question written out or through audio, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time. Hey, we are on YouTube. We've got video podcasts, so click the link in the show notes. Watch our YouTube video. We're working on how to get videos on Spotify and iTunes, Apple Music, things like that. But what we've learned is that people are 80% more likely to remember something if there's a visual associated with it. So watch our video podcast, comment, let us know how we can be better. Let us be part of your journey. Thank you so much.
What you're willing to accept will become your standard. Let's face it. Your credit union managers find it uncomfortable to hold people accountable, and lack of accountability leads to poor performance and disengagement. We have an upcoming series called Coaching for Performance that gives the average manager in the credit union movement something that most managers don't get in the first 10 years of being a manager in America. That's right, management training. See, in Coaching for Performance, we're going to be sharing information that will allow your managers to improve performance, engagement, and the morale of their staff. You will have by this course confident, competent, and collaborative leaders who have the ability to set high standards and challenge your employees to meet those expectations. We have multiple facilitators that are going to focus on defining coaching and understanding the importance of coaching and using the performance management systems that we developed here at Service Star Consulting. Also, we'll diagnose performance deficiencies and conduct effective redirection sessions to be able to pinpoint the root problem versus always addressing the symptoms, which creates burnout. And then finally, we're going to learn how to be an effective coach by setting minimum performance expectations using the 1-minute coach strategies. So learn how to be a better coach with this investment of 7.5 of upcoming hours at our upcoming Coaching for Performance workshop.